Why are we doing it with autism? And the answer to that comes from a woman by the name of Judy Singer, who I think is the most underrated villain in the whole autism saga. So Judy Singer was a woman from Australia. Her family immigrated from, I believe, Eastern Europe after the Holocaust. She's a Jewish immigrant to Australia, and she grows up and she gets, I believe, put on the autism spectrum around like she gets diagnosed, or no, her daughter actually is diagnosed with autism in like the 1980s. And she was a computer person, but then she pivots into what would later become known as disability studies. And she does a lot of work in terms of how do I make and square this circle. And she comes out with a bombshell paper and a thesis in college for her graduate degree called Odd People In, which was later re-released as a book called Neurodiversity, the Birth of an Idea. And so this was the woman who birthed the neurodiversity movement. And so how she was able to do this was by leveraging one of your favorite people, Herbert Marcuse, and by saying that his work and a lot of feminist research, which is what she primarily draw on Marxist literature and feminism, to build a army of abnormal people, essentially was what she said. And she wanted to expand and overthrow this kind of, again, oppressive neurotypical branch so that autistic people can have more access to services and things like that by basically expanding the diagnosis criteria of autism via something called the quote unquote spectrum. Because to your point, autism had a very fixed criteria before the spectrum was enabled because people had to fit in a certain medical diagnosis. But what Judy Singer did was she took autism from a medical diagnosis to an identity group. She moved it from the medical to the political. And so the reason she was able to do that was by creating this thing called the spectrum. And now I have to thread this needle. Do I think that there are different types of people because autism is a mental disorder in a lot of ways, or it is in terms of a disability? And can that manifest differently in different types of people? Of course it can, because people are different, personalities are different. No person is the same. But to say that a spectrum, quote unquote, is the reason for everybody just falling on this number line of how autistic you are, that was not a thing because that's not a mental diagnosis. How can you diagnose someone based off that criteria? And to this point now where we're at, how can you tell someone that you're maybe not autistic, you're kind of just weird in this scenario, or you maybe have like some of this or whatever actually. And so the reason why that happened was primarily because of Judy Singer. And so Singer took this and ran with it. It became this bombshell intellectual paper, and you can buy it on Amazon. I read this whole thing. And if you really want to get mind blown about how big this was and how corrupt this all got, that's a great place to start because this woman did a remarkable amount of damage with what she was able to do with this one book. So that was where where I'd start with kind of how did this get so out of control, overblown, and kind of crazy at that point.